Human rights are not a privilege conferred by the government. They are every human being's entitlement by the virtue of his humanity. Mother Teresa once said, and I quote, but is it the same in the new dispensation? Good morning, viewers, and welcome to the conversation. With me, Denise Shorai, a platform where we deliberate on topical issues affecting the nation of Zimbabwe. Today, I'm joined by the director of Zimrights, Mr. Dzikama Bere, in unpacking human rights violations in the new dispensation. Good morning, Mr. Bere, and welcome to the conversation.
Good morning, Dennis. Thank you for having me.
So the first question will be, what are human rights?
So what we call human rights are the fundamental freedoms or legal entitlements that a person has simply by virtue of being human. So they are derived from nothing more than the simple fact that you are human. They are not given to you by anyone, but they are born with them. So generally, that's what we call human rights. And these are found in different categories, mainly what we know as the civil and political rights. They include the right to life, personal liberty, freedom of expression, freedom of conscience. And then there are also what are called economic, social, and cultural rights, things like the right to housing, cultural rights, right to work, food, etc. And then we have group rights, things like the right to development, the right to peace, minority rights, persons with disabilities, and many others. But these rights, even though for us to understand them, we put them in these categories, but they are interconnected because it's really not possible to enjoy one right without the other.
So you're saying a human being is entitled to these rights just because he's a human?
I lost you there, Shorai. Can you come again?
I'm saying you are confirming that human rights are entitled to a human being just because they are born and they are human.
That is correct.
Okay.
I had added kunyangwe vanhu vasina hunhu, those people who you think they behave in a manner that is unbecoming, they still have their human rights.
Oh, that's good. So the next question would be, why is it important for a country to uphold human rights?
It is important for a country to uphold human rights because that's what differentiates it, what makes us different from animals, because it helps us become the human civilization that we are. Because without human rights, we are cannibalists, we are animals, we are destroying the weak. But when we pay attention to human rights, it means we are able to respect one another, we are able to protect the vulnerable communities, and we are able to live a more dignified life.
Yeah, very true. You spoke on protecting one another. Can you elaborate more on that?
So, a society achieves more when there is inclusion, or what we call inclusivity. Through the human rights regime, we have come to learn that the philosophy of survival of the fittest does not build the human community. The new philosophy is survival of the most cooperative. In biblical language, we would say, you are your sister's keeper, or you are your brother's keeper. And that's what defines a human society, where people are able to look out for each other, take care of the weak, and of the weak, and include the minorities in making decisions. A long time ago, before the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a lot of atrocities happened the world over. And it is these atrocities which led world leaders to come together and say, we better be different from animals that live on cannibalism, on decimating each other. We need to be able to build a more human society so that we avoid violence, we avoid war, and we build an economy that has got more equality. Evidence shows that societies that are unequal are more prone to violence. And yet societies that are closer to each other, that have got more equality, they experience less violence and more prosperity.
So you're confirming that a place with equality has less violence than a place with inequality.
That is correct. That is correct.
What are some of the human rights statutes that Zimbabwe is a signatory to?
So when it comes to observance of human rights, and what you're talking about is mainly international law. So when it comes to human rights, we have got our own domestic legal framework, which is Chapter 4 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe, which provides for protection for fundamental rights. But in addition to our own domestic laws, we also have international laws to which we as a civilized country have said we want to sign up to. So these are the laws which include the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, the International Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and the convention. So there are quite a number of conventions, but there are also other conventions that we have not been party to. Things like the Convention Against Torture, which human rights organizations are always saying to the government, you need to ratify the Convention Against Torture. And then we also have what is known as the Rome Statute, which creates the ICC. So there are quite a number that we are party to. There are also quite a number that we are not party to.
So you say that Zimbabwe is signatory to quite a number of human rights statutes. What's the importance of these statutes?
So the importance of these statutes is that it creates a standard for human conduct. This is what we call accountability. It builds on the principle that we need, like I said, to be our brother's keeper or our sister's keeper. We appreciate that on our own, we are weak human beings. We are prone to self-interest. We are prone to doing things that only benefit ourselves. So the community of nations then comes together and say, how can we hold each other accountable in a peer-to-peer way? So that's when
Mr. Bere.
Yes.
Mr. Bere, sorry to take you back. You said we are prone to do things that benefit ourselves. Do you confirm?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, thank you so much. You can go on.
So these international statutes are then agreements in which communities come together and they say, we think this is an important standard for us to uphold. How can we hold each other to account so that we put sanctions against bad behavior and we put incentives for good behavior? So this is when these international statutes then come in, and countries then have to opt in to decide that we agree that we want to be bound by this particular statute.
So these statutes, they are not politically affiliated.
You can say there is political affiliation in the sense that it is the governments, the member states, that have to sign in to be bound by those particular statutes.
So we are looking at the government that we have now. Do you think that the government might have signed these statutes in favor of their political agenda?
Yes, yes, and that is very normal in politics, and it actually works both for and against the upholding of human rights, in the sense that you need to be able to put pressure for a government. Governments want to look good. Politicians want to look good. So the only way that we are able to push good policies is when they realize there's political capital in terms of implementing certain policies. However, simply putting a signature on a piece of paper and actually walking the talk is a different thing. So we want to be able to hold governments to account, not only for putting signatures, but for actually implementing policies that transform real lives.
All right. Are there any penalties for a country that violates international human rights statutes?
Yes, yes. So most of these laws are what we call soft law, meaning to say they have got persuasive authority, and the penalty that you get sometimes is disapproval from the other community of nations. Traditionally in Africa, we believe in Ubuntu. That is, what other people think about you is very important. You remember that when the new dispensation took over here in Zimbabwe, they preached the open for business mantra. And the key principle underlying that is that if you are upholding rights, values of human dignity, then other people will be interested to come and invest in your community. But if you are known to be a person who are killing your own people, putting them in prison, then other countries will then dissociate themselves from you. So that is then that is the kind of sanction that then comes in. So in a community of nations, whether it's in the African Union, in the United Nations, leaders must allow to subject themselves to their peers for accountability, to say, I think I am doing well. These are the good things that I'm doing. And then they also give them advice. It means countries and governments choose to be able to be exemplary to each other and help each other in upholding high standards of human rights.
So you're saying that a government should be able to account itself for upholding human rights.
That is correct. That is correct. But in addition to that, there are some statutes that go beyond just the peer review. Some statutes go on to unlock certain actions. For example, the Rome Statute actually gives power to the International Criminal Court, where your domestic courts have failed to uphold the justice. It gives power to the International Criminal Court to come and investigate cases of human rights violations. But the country to be investigated then has to agree that I want to subject myself to this particular measure.
So you are saying that the International Criminal Court cannot come into a country without the president or the government's approval?
It's a long story. So the government first has to sign the Rome Statute, to agree to be bound by the Rome Statute, for the International Criminal Court to assume jurisdiction in that particular country. Now, in practice, it's usually not the same government, or the conditions are usually different. So, for example, when a new government comes into power and they're making all those good promises, they may choose to sign the Rome Statute to give the International Criminal Court power. But once they are drunk with power, years down the line, they start violating human rights, or there's succession within particular government. There's probably a new president who does not believe in human rights. Then the challenge then comes that once your country has accepted that, it means that the International Criminal Court will then have jurisdiction over those particular human rights violations.
All right, thank you. So looking at Mugabe versus the Second Republic, which leadership was better in terms of upholding human rights?
Now that's a question that's difficult to answer scientifically because Mugabe was in power for quite a long period of time, and I think we only have had the new dispensation, I think, for, is it 3 years? But what we can talk about is our current experiences, maybe within a short period of time, is that we have seen that the number of human rights violations has increased since the new dispensation. I think you can put figures to this. Almost every demonstration that was called upon by the opposition has been crushed by the new dispensation. 1 August 2018, the military unleashed violence on civilians. In January 2019,
Mr. Bere, looking at
yeah.
the one that you're talking about, the government has stated that it was the Tajamuka that incited violence on that day. And we had also other people coming into play, and there was a court or there were investigations on the allegations that were raised. Yet, at the end of the allegations, it was seen that these violent acts were done by the opposition party, but nothing was tangible to hold the government liable for those violent acts. What's your comment on that?
So the August 2018 post-election violence was subjected to an investigation by the Montlandy Commission. And the Montlandy Commission did find that the military was responsible for killing of civilians. It also did find that indeed there was violence, and it made recommendations that those particular soldiers who killed civilians, they must be held accountable, and that there must be institutional reform, particularly within the security sector. So it is not true that the government was cleared of any wrongdoing by the Montlandy Commission. In fact, the government was convicted by the Montlandy Commission. But then we probably don't even need the Montlandy Commission because there's already video evidence, which was even produced before the Montlandy Commission. And witnesses gave testimony before the Montlandy Commission. And this is evidence of serious human rights violations that happened in broad daylight.
All right. Even we are still talking on that. You are saying that the military was told to hold those accountable for the shootings, right?
That is correct.
Yes. But did we see any trial on these military experts that were being held accountable?
We did not see any. In fact, what we saw is that some of them were actually then promoted following the violence. There was no accountability.
Okay, you can go on with what you were saying.
Yes, that's so when we then look at that progression, it then becomes, I think, from where we currently standing, we have not yet spent 30 years under the Second Republic, but I think the first 3 years of the Second Republic have been quite bad. Like I mentioned, there's quite a lot of evidence that violence is actually even increasing. And when you then begin to compare with what was happening, I think in the previous administration, in a short period, I think the Second Republic has done much more damage. But again, it's not fair to conclude that the current administration is worse than the Mugabe administration. You need to remember that it was the Mugabe administration that killed 40,000 people in Matabeleland. So for now, I think we can agree that the human rights record of the new dispensation is bad. Maybe give them more time, they will probably do much more damage, but it is very clear that we are on the wrong trajectory.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So, as you have said that the current human rights space is bad, but we are saying a little bit of lift to some people where we now have comedy skits of people bringing out the ills of the government. Writers are writing, and some of them have faced some attacks, but some of them they have not yet faced attacks. What's your comment on that?
We shouldn't measure our human rights standards by those whom we have not violated. We should measure our human rights standards basically by not violating human rights. So we shouldn't be saying not enough artists have been abducted. Therefore, we are doing better. We know about the abduction of Konyet. Currently, Johanna Mamombe and the MDC young leaders are also currently, you know about Wopwell Chingono. So there are quite many artists who have had to pay under the new dispensation, to pay their freedom under the new dispensation. That there is freedom of speech, I think it's a myth. We have seen how much control that the government has put on the airwaves. I myself here can testify that at one point in time, together with the chairperson of the NGO Forum, Justina Mukoko, we were on a radio program on Capitol, speaking about torture, when the studio was invaded by people who were saying the information that we were sharing had not been cleared. And the head, the station manager of that particular radio station was then fired. So we can, I think recently there was, there are many examples that I could cite. But the idea that that there is more freedom of expression under the new dispensation than under Mugabe is a myth. There isn't freedom of expression. People are paying with their lives for the expression.
You mentioned the MDC trio, but the state media produced a documentary which shows that they were not adapted. These were fake allegations. What's your comment on that?
Well, that documentary has been critiqued, and many credible people have said that documentary is fiction. But look, the state media are professionals in fiction. There is a High Court judgment by Mafusire J, in which Veritas challenged ZBC's coverage of the 2018 election. And Mafusire J found that they were biased, and that because of their bias, there are repercussions democracy has to pay. So the credibility of ZBC in terms of being merchants of truth isn't the one that we should be, very proud of.
All right. You also mentioned Wopwell Chimono. Listening to a comment from Mr. Mangwana, he said that Mr. Chimono was not arrested for exposing corruption or encouraging a protest, but he was arrested for undermining the government and trying to subvert the government. What's your comment on that?
Look, sadly, I think Mr. Mangwana, we all know that we're speaking not of experts, but of spin doctors. That's the problem that we have in this country. We invest a lot in spin doctors, and instead of putting investment in expert advisors. It is very clear that Hopewell, when he started tweeting about corruption, Patrick Chinamasa, the spokesperson of ZANU-PF, addressed a press conference and called him unscrupulous and warned him to leave the first family alone. And when Hopewell continued to speak out against corruption, that's when his home was violently broken into by the state agents, who clearly, in the way that they arrested Hopewell Chimono, acted more like a militia or a mafia than a disciplined police force. And when you look at that fall of events, wherein Hopewell we had to spend more than 40 days in prison without trial, that tells you that even the state was bent on punishing him and not subjecting him to justice. And there's a pattern to this kind of human rights violations where the state knows that they do not have a case against an individual. So it will never get to trial. And if it gets to trial, it will never stand. So what do? They lock him up. So, I mean, the case of Wopo Chingono, the way it happened, it's not just Wopo Chingono. There are many individuals who have been subjected to that kind of persecution.
So now this brings me to a question of jurisdiction of our constitutional courts in protecting human rights violations. What is your comment? Is the constitutional court independent from the political affiliation in protecting human rights violations, humans from human rights violations?
Yeah, so I think that's the question of the independence of the judiciary, which has been interrogated and questioned a number of times. What I can tell you, I think, from my experience, I'm a former judicial officer myself. And what I can tell you from my experience is that there are very good judicial officers in the judiciary, judges and magistrates who know what they're doing and who will be able to interpret the law as it is. But there are also some very dubious judgments that have come from the judiciary. Remember the time when the lawyers decided to go and march protesting against what they called command justice, where clearly it seemed like there was a pattern within the magisterial courts, within the magistrates' courts, to deny people unreasonably of their freedoms. So there are areas, I think, that need improvement in terms of the judiciary. And there are indeed some judicial officers who have no business in that judiciary. They are politicians in judicial roles. And I think if they find their conscience, I would encourage them to find employment somewhere else. But indeed, they are very good judges, very good magistrates. We have passed very, progressive judgments, which is the reason why we continue to go to court, because we believe that the judiciary as a whole is not lost. There could be individuals here and there, but indeed, it's very important for us to keep going to the courts, litigate, expose the evidence.
You said we should continue believing in our courts, but we have job women. We have Hopo Chingono. They were held under trial, in prison without trial. Yet you are saying that we should continue believing in our courts. But here's a man who has done no crime, being in prison. How do you comment? What do you say on that?
Well, like I said, there are areas I think that require improvement, and there are, administrative loopholes within the judiciary, which can be exploited, I think, by the state to try and violate people's rights. So, for example, there's something called forum shopping, where the state knows that a particular judge is mainly favorable to the police or is mainly favorable to the state. As a result, they then make sure that they put that judgment in front of that particular judge. That then becomes, I think, a problem. And I think it's an administrative problem and also a problem with that particular judge. But like I mentioned, there are very good judges who are able to deliver justice when called upon to. And like you're saying, I think ultimately we were able to see Hopo Chingono being granted bail and Jacob Garuvume being granted bail despite all the challenges which they faced. I think that tells us that there is a ray of hope within the judiciary, but there are serious challenges that need to be addressed.
Well, thank you so much. So what's your overall comment with regards to human rights activism?
Look, my overall comment regarding human rights activism is that human rights are everyone's business. It might look, particularly because of the intensity of the challenges we are facing today, that human rights are just about civil and political rights. As a result, sometimes people may think that human rights is actually just about politics and confronting the government. But human rights are our way of life. Human rights are the lights that you need at home. Human rights are the roads that you drive in. These are the schools that you send your children to. These are the hospitals that we seek healing when we fall sick, when we are not well. So human rights are everything, and it is very important for ordinary people like you and I to acknowledge that we've got a role to play in terms of advancing human rights. Many times, people that this issue of human rights is just for NGOs, but human rights are very personal. When it then comes home, you realize that you need to go and see a doctor. And there isn't a doctor to attend to you because the government has taken money meant to pay doctors and they have sent it for elections. That's when you then realize that human rights are for everyone. They're not for NGOs and they're very personal. So it's very important that we are able to, as individuals, private individuals, even in our little ways, we are able to invest in advancing human rights. There are many ways that we can do that. You're a journalist and you're doing that, you're using media as a tool for advancing human rights. If you're a medical practitioner, you can use that to advance human rights. So at the heart of human rights is human dignity, and everyone has got a role to play in terms of advancing and protecting the dignity of human beings.
Thank you so much. So what methods can a human rights activist employ to ensure that the power block uphold human rights?
So there are many ways. I think the first thing to do is awareness. We need to understand the world we are living in and the challenges that we are facing. Young people need to be worried more, not simply about Manchester United and Barcelona. They need to know about the things that are affecting them in their daily life. So that's the first thing. But then secondly, it's not enough to just be aware. It's important to take action. So young people need to invest in taking action to resolve the issues that they face in their communities without waiting for a leader to come from somewhere and resolve problems. The concept that I'm talking about beyond violation of human rights, but we need to be able to take steps to correct the wrongs where we can. And finally, we need to build a community. One person shouting against injustice, sometimes their voice can become a lone voice. But when more and more people speak out against injustices, it begins to make political sense to our political leaders who care about numbers and elections and politics. And I think these are the three ways that I think I would encourage ordinary people to step forward and speak out for human rights.
Okay, now you're talking about action, speaking up. But in this dispensation now, people are now afraid to speak up what they are facing because they risk being imprisoned, they risk being adopted, they risk being tortured. So are there other ways that one can implore can advertise or go out there to speak up for themselves without being tortured, without going through other all those problems?
Yeah, you're right. I think you're right. We're living in very difficult times where speaking out against human rights can put you in harm's way. But there are many ways, in this world where we are living in, a highly digitalized world, a virtual world, there have been so many tools that have now been put at our disposal to allow us to be able to do something. I can tell you that, Martin Luther said, those who can't fly must run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. Whatever the case, but keep moving forward. So there are many tools that we can make use of. Now there are tools for digital activism. that allow you to even go behind your keyboard and speak out within the safety of the internet. Sometimes it simply means just calling your counselor and complaining about your service. Sometimes it means when the parliament is calling for participation in terms of amendment of the constitution, it simply means attending that meeting and make your voice heard. When they advertise that they want nominations for commissioners of human rights, it means stepping forward and making a nomination. Or when there is a position to be held, a political position to be held, it means stepping forward and standing for that. What am I saying? I am saying human rights are everything. And there are thousands of actions that we can undertake that are not harmless, that we are not taking care of, that we are not participating in, that need popular support. And we can be able to make a difference by stepping forward and doing that. But having said that, we should not do away with the question of courage, because human rights violations are committed by powerful actors. Nothing has ever changed our world without the courage of people who decided to step forward. I could take you as far back as slavery, slave trade, when it was the normal economy to run economies on slave labor. There were no foundations during those days where people could apply for money, but a few people decided to step forward and said, this is wrong. So if you look at every major transformation that has happened in our world, including the defeat and collapse of colonialism, it has had to take courage of people who stand up and who say, this isn't the world that we want to build. So while there are safe actions that we can do behind closed doors, I think our time calls for people of courage to be able to step forward and even confront some of the wicked challenges that we face.
And what are some of the major human rights violations that you have recorded during the period under review?
I think topping among all of them is the question of police brutality. The police have been torturing people and killing people, starting off with ordinary, accused persons. A person is accused of stealing tomatoes, they will be tortured for that. Protesters, I think we saw images, even I think 26 Richard did publish images of the police beating up women at a protest. And I think there were 3 consecutive protests where it looked like the police were clearly targeting women, as an example. So that's, and then I think in Bulawayo, both in Bulawayo and Harare, police killed quite a number of people. We have the case of Levis Ngube, who was killed during lockdown. In Slovenia, we have someone who was shot by the police and died. And the story of the Mpofu sisters who were tortured by the police. So among all of the violations, I think police brutality has been topping the list. And then, of course, we have issues like detention without trial, the cases of Hopewell, Chingono, Godfrey Kurawone, and quite a number. This becomes a violation when you look at how the case then unfolds, and it becomes very clear that the police simply arrested this person in order to punish him because they actually don't have evidence that such people committed violations. And then, of course, we have torture, which is committed not only by the police, but many other people, but ostensibly with the blessings of the state. We have the case of people like Johanna Mamombe. We have the case of Mcheiwa, and many other people who have been tortured. So I think these are some of the violations that we have been dealing with under the new dispensation.
Right. As an organization that deals with human rights, what have you done during the underlying period to ensure that people are aware of their rights?
So we are a grassroots organization, which is a distinctive feature of Zimrights. As a result, one of the things that we have always done is to build a community of believers in human rights. So we have been able, and that helps, raise awareness in terms of human rights issues, but it also helps create leaders out of the communities where we live in, because human rights aren't a prerogative of only leaders, but also the masses. So we're trying to make sure that every person, they are aware of their rights, and the remedies available and the protection mechanisms available. But beyond that, we are also engaging the government in a number of conversations. We currently running a series of dialogues called the devolution series, in which we are looking at constitutional provisions that provide for the implementation of devolution. Our understanding is that if devolution is applied in a proper way, more and more people will be able to influence government policy because they find themselves closer to leadership, and leaders will get more opportunities to learn more from the communities. Government will be closer to the people. That might help transform our governance system. So these are some of the activities that we've been involved in.
All right, thank you so much for joining us in the conversation.
Thank you very much for hosting me.
That was Mr. Dzikama Bere, who was helping us, and we were deliberating on human rights violations in the new dispensation. Thank you, viewers, for joining us, and we hope to meet again next week. Don't forget to like our Facebook and Instagram page, 263 Chat, and to subscribe to our YouTube page, 263 Chat, and don't forget to visit our website, www.263chat.com. Thank you so much. Dennis Shorai is my name.